Hello everybody. Today what we're having is a preliminary GM guide. This is the first time that I go through some of this information, so there might be changes in the future. The goal is that I'm going to add to one of the PDFs in the Discord channel, the Playing Frostmark PDF, a small GM guide at the end of the document. So that's where we'll end up. I'm practically done with maybe 50% of the text, and of course then it needs like proofreading, but maybe in a week or so it will be there, and then it's my hope that people will be able, or it will be an easier time to GM a Frostmark game of your own. Yes, but also remember that once the preliminary guide is in the Playing Frostmark PDF, that's still a preliminary GM guide. So it's subject to change in the future. Of course, until the Kickstarter and like the official, like nice looking thing comes out, the released version. This preliminary GM guide also does not include the basics of GMing. Like, it has nothing. It doesn't talk about how to build an encounter. And it doesn't talk about how to build your own world. It doesn't talk about how to create NPCs. He doesn't talk about but a GM does. I already have a lot of information and text that is just Frostmark related, that I want. It's unnecessary to have that much information for now. Of course, that will be included in the final version of Frostmark, but for now I'm only going to talk about and include tips and guidelines for the GM, specifically when it comes to Frostmark and Frostmark related topics. If you would feel uncertain about the basics or don't know how to GM, then I would recommend different resources online. There's a lot of good GM guides out there that can give you the basics of how it works. So that's how it's going to be for now. And I might also refer to something called World Most Popular RPG. And that you know what that refers to. It's the one who we shall not speak of, because it's trademarked and we do not want to invite the devil onto our doorstep. But if I'm saying World Most Popular RPG system, then you know which system I'm talking about. Alright. Any questions about that? Would you feel ready to get into this preliminary GM guide? Are you planning to have a print version of Frostmark material, and how many books would that be? Or is that soon to talk about? I've looked into it extensively, Hemosite. It was a headache of mine for many months and caused me a lot of stress. The problem is that since I do not know or cannot guarantee how many volumes of Frostmark that I will sell, it was impossible for me to guarantee a cost of a book that would be still manageable for me, that I'm not going minus, like without profit for me, basically, and that would be sensible for you, the buyer, or you, the pledger in the Kickstarter. And like looked into 20 or so companies, and when you're looking at small volumes, you're looking at prices per book, and you're probably looking at 2 500-page books or 3 about 300 pages books. I think it was more cost effective to have 300 pages books instead of 2, because of the volume cost when you like went past 350 ramped up more, rather than having like another frame, another book. So let's say three books of about 300 to 350 pages. One such book would, in most cases, on average, cost about $100 to $1,500 on average. When we're talking about really small runs, and that's just not possible. Like most books, RPG books out there on the market, is about 30 to 60. There was one company that I really liked that I had like a Zoom meeting with that was in America, but they only had one printing press, and that was in America. And I was able to get down to a price of like $60 to $70 with them for one book. But most of my customers or people that have supported me so far are European. So we were looking at on average a transporting cost across the Atlantic for about $10 to $20 per book. And then it became too expensive for the customer again. So I was like, this is giving me gray hairs. This is giving me so much stress. I can't figure this hurdle out. I'm not even done with the game, and it's prolonging everything. So I decided to aim towards the Kickstarter that just has a digital release. And if that digital release is successful, then in the future I can make a Kickstarter where money doesn't really matter as much. Because the book is already created, right? Because part of the money that's in the Kickstarter would just go to salary, so I can pay rent and pay food, so I can continue like working on it. So that's the situation. Does that satisfy you, Homicide? Got it. Here's hoping this thing takes off. Thank you. Awesome. Alright. Then let's get into it. Is it space? Oh, just clicking? Alright, and then click out of it? Okay, good. Alright, we're gonna start talking about mechanics. Or anything that discusses the system, gameplay, anything that has to do with math or behind the scene works with balance with the GM. That's our first part. Then the second part later on is going to be about lore and world and narrative. And then I have a third part that I didn't have the time to prepare today, which is like general tips about like session zeros and starting money and things like that. But I don't think we're going to finish with everything anyway today. So let's start with mechanics. So the third thing I want to discuss is balancing player characters in Frostmark. Frostmark is fundamentally different than the world's most popular RPG system because of its multi-classing system and its way to disregard abilities and enable abilities that you might not be able to take in as a character, as a player character if you were playing the world's most popular RPG. you can make way more powerful characters in Frostmark than you can in the world's most popular RPG. And there might be new builds that are unlocked that might be there might not be any prior wisdom online of how to tackle them. Now there are some changes that I have done personally to some abilities that I found, some abilities, feats, class features, you know, anything in the game that I found ridiculous and too obvious of a must pick that has been changed, and there are some that has been buffed to make them more viable. But in general, Frostmark creates more powerful characters. And it also increases the distance between players who know what they're doing and players who do not know what they're doing. And when I'm talking about overpowered and underpowered, or in general balancing of players, I'm not only strictly speaking about combat, about physical expression. In Frostmark, I want to highlight that the physical, the mental, and the social is as important. So when balancing, when talking about encounters, when I say encounters and balancing and not combat, that means I'm talking about all three scenarios, not just combat. So what Frostmark do to rectify this, I wouldn't even say, like, we don't even engage in this conversation. We do not engage into the conversation of overpowered builds and underpowered builds and optimal builds. We disregard that whole conversation for a completely other conversation that is held between the GM and the player. It works a little bit different, the character creation process in Frostmark, because instead of just pitching an idea to new players and the new players creating characters, in Frostmark the GM is directly involved in the creation of the characters. The step number one in character creation is literally create a character theme and discuss which AOs your character has access to with your GM. Of course, you should be a bit pragmatic with this. If you're just playing a short campaign, or it's just a throwaway thing, where the player characters don't matter as much, then you don't need to be as involved. For case in point, when I created these mini adventures, I pre-created the characters because the character creation process in Frostmark, not only for the player but also for the GM, is longer and it requires more energy and effort. So there's something called the character creation discussion. You and your GM discusses which theme, which basic structure of a backstory you want, and the goal is, there's two goals for this. The first goal is that the GM can more easily wove in the character's backstory and themes and goals into the story that they tell, because they intimately know that character, because you together created the fundamentals, the basics of that character. And then number two, where we get into the second point here, the conversation that Frostmark has, not the conversation of what is most optimal or overpowered, underpowered. Frostmark says, do not choose in accordance with what would be the most optimal for your character concept. Instead, choose in accordance with what makes more thematic sense. So the whole conversation about optimal builds and things like that doesn't technically exist in Frostmark, because you as a player are never allowed to take an ability that is outside your character's theme and concept. And you and the GM kinda create this rule together. You as a player, you know your character the most, you understand the personality most, you know what you want. And then the GM is there as a bit of a, I wouldn't really say judge and jury, but a little bit of a inspiration source, and a bit of like keeping the player from temptation. The GM can set boundaries, ask questions of like, but do you really think that that's appropriate considering this and this and this? I thought your character was a bit more like this, am I wrong? But your character did this last, before this level up, how does this make sense? So it's not a thing where the GM decides what the player can take for their player character. It's more about that you have a discussion about where your character is going and what they're about, and together you come to answers to these questions of which ability to take or which feat to take, which ability score to increase, and so on and so forth. Now the GM do have the power to say that this does not make sense. I don't want you to take this because then you become, there's a loophole here I didn't know of. This will create a lot of problems. Can we find another ability, feat, ability score, whatever, that could also work with the character? So instead of having a situation where you have the players almost versus the GM, sometimes it can devolve into in a normal game. In Frostmark, it's a collaborative process of creating these characters and continuing their advancement in the future. The GM and the player does this together to keep it thematic and keep it sensible with the world and the character's backstory. Yes, but in case in point, the GM should be a little bit careful about setting hard lines, because often players feel a sense of ownership over their characters and it can create some friction. So it's very important to stay open and do alternatives, suggest something else, have a open collaborative discussion about it, rather than always making hard boundaries. Could you just tell the players, I'm nerfing the loophole, but decide of if you start abusing it? You definitely can. You definitely can, which is the last point here, which I can jump to immediately, is that, you know, no shoe fits all. No no group is alike, no GM is alike, and whatever solution works for you and your group and it still keeps things fun, then you know, you do you, and your group does itself. But indeed, if it's so that there is a specific character build, a player comes upon, and it makes thematic sense with their character, and it makes sense with their backstory. As a GM, you can definitely say that I'm fine with this as long as you do not abuse it. And then it all depends upon how experienced and polite that player is. If they're more of a meta gamer or if they're more of a role-playing gamer, it all depends upon the person, if such things are necessary. But in general, what Frostmark is trying to encourage is more narrative, role-play, collaborative process kind of game style rather than metagaming. This is supposed to police a little bit of metagaming, the GM's role in creating a character, but I would say that those people who enjoy metagaming will not and does not adapt to this is not really playing Frostmark as it's intended. But I have no power of that. That's, you know, up to the consumer. But that's what I'm trying to create Frostmark for. If it's so that you have some characters or one character or several characters in a group where there's changes between their effectiveness in encounters, underpowered or overpowered or some version of it. There are two terms that I usually keep track of, and that's vastness and usefulness. Vastness simply denotes the difference in power between the PCs. If the difference is smaller or more manageable, then either it's so small or small enough that it doesn't create friction in the party and it doesn't make the GM's job particularly harder when it comes to balancing encounters. Or it could be a thing that the GM can easily come up with other environmental situations or other tactical tactics on the battle map to favor different builds. But if the difference between players is more vast, where it's obvious that one character is vastly more powerful than the others, you should be careful so that it doesn't create friction inside of a group. It is also for you as a GM, it can be hard to create balanced and challenging encounters. You can have problems where it's super easy for one character but deadly for the others. And it can also become monotone and narratively unfriendly if you're supposed to be this group of like somewhat equal people when it comes to attention and renown and influence. The person who is stronger is going to be showered in it in a different way than the other characters. And if you constantly need as a GM to create this specific battle conditions to try and fix a vastness of power difference between player characters, then you as a GM can start lose having as much fun, and you might have to restrict the stories that you tell. So it can create a lot of problems. So it's a positive thing that as a GM you're very involved in the character creation in Frostmark, because hopefully you can catch these problems before you have already played for a while. So there's no takesy-backsies or consistency issues that you have to nerf a player suddenly, which is often creates tension and some friction. And so at that point you can basically talk to the players or the player who is more powerful or more underpowered, and either help them of becoming more powerful or try to gently restrict them towards the rest of the party is not on the same power level as your character is, and you're not going to have fun. The other people are not going to have as much fun to keep the challenge and the thrill in combat or in any kind of encounter. You should also consider as a GM that it might not be a good idea from the start to have two different kind of role players in the same group. Of course, this is not black and white. It's more of a slider between caring about optimization and caring only about roleplay. None of us are, you know, on either side of the extreme spectrum, or it would be very unusual. But having players that lean slightly towards one side, or strongly towards one side, and players lean strongly to the other, is harder to bring together in a cohesive group, because they are going to enjoy different things. The second term when it comes to balancing NPCs is usefulness, which is something that matters to a lot of players. I want to be useful with my character. I don't have to be the most overpowered, I don't need to be the most important, but at least I want to be useful to my party. It's something that I hear a lot. As soon as a character doesn't feel useful, they start feeling insecure about their place in the party. And why I bring this up is that since Frostmark seeks to not only create high stakes and consequences from combat encounters, but also from mental and social encounters, some players might be stronger or weaker in different kind of encounters. You can have a player that is very powerful in combat, but weak in social situations, and vice versa. And then maybe what I just discussed above about vastness is not necessary anymore, because both characters still feel useful, as long as you do a healthy variance of social encounters and combat encounters where both players can shine and do what they're good at. But once again, no shoe fits all. All groups are different. So just think about what you like as a GM and how you usually do things. If it's a method that works for you, and for your players. But be in the end mindful of how to balance NPCs, or that is important to think about the interbalancing of PCs, because it will impact the longevity and the satisfaction of the game, both for you as a GM and your players. So we're thinking about it. But most important when it comes to balancing NPCs is these two things in Frostmark. You as a GM, you're a part of the process. You collaborate with your player. Together you create the character, the player. It's their character, but the GM can offer encouragement, inspiration, and set some restrictions, ask questions, suggest other things, maybe say, I don't really see why you take this ability, can you explain to me why? And so it's like an open discussion about it. And then number 2, Frostmark does not balance towards what's optimal. It balances towards what makes sense with your character concept, your theme, and your character's backstory. So it's not about which option is most optimal for my character, it's which option is the most immersive and thematic for my character. I guess one thing to consider is that having trouble carrying your weight in a fight is going to lose you the character more easily than inability to contribute to haggling with shopkeepers. Well, that's why I'm saying, like, social encounters in Frostmark is not haggling with shopkeepers. The world is dangerous in Frostmark. If you piss off somebody with a powerful organization, they are going to come at you, and not necessarily with CRs that you're able to handle. So there might be higher stakes in social encounters in Frostmark than what you usually see in other games. So that's one thing. And the second, it's very much true that you might, a character might die on the battlefield, but might not die in diplomacy. But then we're forgetting, and I feel like sometimes a lot of players also forget the goal of role-playing games, or at least what I think is role-playing games is not about winning. It's not about getting to the end of the story and being victorious. It's about having fun until you get there.
Unless you're a winner, like me.
Ah, fuck off. So, and that can create interesting roleplay. It can be fun feeling scared, feeling like a glass cannon in combat, and coming up with other ways to be useful for the party than risking your life in combat. Not all characters need to enter into combat and do combaty things in a party. That's a very radical thing to say, but it's very much the truth. For example, if you have a party of a diplomat and a bodyguard, going off on adventure with each other, if it would be a physical encounter, then maybe the diplomat is so scared of blood and combat and physical stuff that he doesn't even elect to enter initiative, and he or she, and just the bodyguard enters into initiative.
You remember, I don't know if anyone in the chat has read The Lies of La Clamora, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a really good balance between, so you can actually see, but there's a really good balance between the two main characters, Jean and Locke, where they, Jean is brawn, he's smart, but he doesn't have the wit Locke does.
Mm-hmm.
He's big, he's strong, and he fights real good. He hit thing hard, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But Locke, sure, he can do something with a knife.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's somewhat trained,
Mm-hmm.
but
he has basically zero combat experience.
Yeah,
or
and
ability.
most of his combat experience is being kicked the shit out of, right?
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's more fun as a story because of that dynamic.
Right.
If as in D&D, as in writing a book or whatever.
Yeah, playing off each other's strengths and then being in situations where you have to do what you're bad at, or finding solutions to it, like in an unconventional way.
The more, how I see it, when it comes to a party, right? Mm-hmm. The more you have to rely on each other to solve a problem, the better, right? Like, if we were doing a campaign, and I was playing, let's say, Steve, right? Mm-hmm.
Tell everybody what Steve is.
Steve is a skeleton who jumps between bodies using soul marks, right? And because maybe I'm in skeleton form, I can't really go outside and interact with people because I'm a fucking walking corpse, right?
Right. But if anybody needs to go into really deep, murky water,
yeah, I don't
do
need
not
to breathe anymore. I need to do. I can do a lot of those kinds of
walk
things.
into a gas chamber or something like that.
Yeah. Like, you need, like, I think the most fun I've ever had in a role-playing game is when the players don't talk to the GM mostly about making their character. They talk to each other and then go, "Yo, okay, well, like, you got this covered. How about if I just, like, I get really strong and I'm able to carry all of the loot, the rogue steals or whatever."
Well, that's
as a
like
stereotype.
That's the second step. I see it. Like, the first step is at least talking to a GM, and then the second step, which is a very luxurious step to have, is talking with the rest of the players.
Am I interrupting you
No. It's interesting to hear your opinion.
Yeah, but yeah, that's my main thought.
Your 2 cents.
That's my main thought. Right. Right. I feel like a lot more groups need a lot more Locke and Jean, where Jean is not as useful in conning people as Locke, right? But Locke is also just completely fucking useless in a fight, basically. Like,
Yeah.
he's more of a punching bag than anything.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
And that's
very
fun.
true. Yeah.
It's fun. It's a dynamic.
Okay.
It's good to have dynamics.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to my corner.
Thank you. That was Joey, everybody. All right. Do you feel ready to move on from this topic? Or any other comments or questions about balancing PCs and how the character creation process in Frostmark is made, not through optimization, but through immersion and through the GM and player discussion. I actually wonder if it wouldn't be better to have the character creation discussion and who gets what role discussion at the same time. Well, yeah. I mean, I would always say that you should have a session 0 before you get down into the nitty gritty of creating a character. Absolutely. I always think that all players should be a part of the session 0, so you don't get like 2 or 3 session 0s. Like you schedule a session 0, talk about expectations, you talk about what kind of campaign you want to be having, rules and what people are comfortable with, and then you bring out basic character creation concepts to each other. Maybe you have 2 players to say, hey, do you want to play brother and sister, or cousins, or bodyguard and noble, and something like that. And then you get into the actual mechanics of things and fleshing out the backstory with the GM. Either together, you can have a call with 2 or 3 players at the same time. Might be a little bit much for the GM, but definitely possible. But then you have the discussion with the GM to nail down some themes and backstory details of your character. This is just a step 1 in character creation. I see session 0 as the step 0. So you don't have to be like have the date of birth and when I was 10 this happened with the GM, but there should be a structure. You should make up a structure with the GM when you decide the ability origins. And then it's a continuous discussion as you go along. You know, you probably send the character sheet, or you 2 together, GM and players, you know, just finish all the steps when it comes to character creation. Do it together, or you send the character sheet and you go through it as a GM thinking, does this all make sense with what I heard from the player? Otherwise, you open up a conversation with them, saying, what were your motivations around this? I don't get this, but that one I get, so forth and so on. And then the player fleshes out the backstory. You receive it as a GM, and you start doing prep work as a GM, woven in the ideas that you have for the story with the players, making sure that there's player motivation. That's at least how I see it. How I would do it. How I would recognize. Oh God, I'm so red. I just looked at myself, and I'm so red.
That is very red.
Yeah. See, does this make it any better? To just bring in a little bit of natural light? Alright then. Okay, that's now look way less red. Alright though. pressing my throat a bit and seeing if anybody else wants to make a comment. Okay, alright then. We shall move away from this topic and head into using the ability scores. This is something that I've heard for some people, especially Theron or Adrian or Costi&D, that they would wish to have more concrete advice of how to use the ability scores and especially the skills, since they're different than the world's most popular RPG system. Let me highlight these differences. This information is written some in the character creation process when the ability scores are presented in step number 4, and then around step number 5 for the accomplishment section you have the skills. You also have in playing Frostmark the ability scores are discussed a bit more, but I'm gonna really do like a very basic hackable way of how to think about the ability scores and then later the skills. So when we look at the ability score square, it's a 3x3 square. Horizontally we have the physical stats in the top. So brawn is a physical stat, dexterity is a physical stat, and vitality is a physical stat. Then we get the mental stats in the middle that deal with everything that has to do with the mind, or a form of mind, I would say. And then we have the social stats in the bottom. You can say that this is like internal mental stats and this is external mental stats. But physical, mental, and then social. And then on the vertical axis, we have offensive stats, which is broad intelligence or presence. In the middle we got finesse stats, dexterity, cunning, and manipulation. And in the rear we got the defensive stats. So just for example, looking at cunning, we know that it's a mental finesse stat. So it has to do with, you can say, mental gymnastics, or mental dexterity, or mental agility. And even like already at that point you have an idea of what cunning, for example, does. Composure, social, defensive. But I can also go through them, what they mean beyond these terms. Brawn, easily, bodily strength. Dexterity, hand-to-eye coordination, balance, agility. Vitality, health, stamina, physical resistance. Intelligence, memory, and education. Cunning is deduction and reasoning. Resolve is willpower and conviction. Presence is charisma, magnetism, body language. And manipulation, wit, and eloquence. And the composure is being observant, strength of character, and self-control. Yes. Any questions about the ability scores? Oh yeah. There's some people who have a problem between intelligence and cunning, when intelligence should be used and when cunning should be used. Intelligence is all about what your character knows and their ability to recall that information. If you have a character, when in the character creation process, your intelligence should be directly tied to what kind of education you were given. A straight 10 in intelligence is basically you're just a peasant. And it's what you've been hearing in church, it's what you've been hearing from the people around you. You might have had some very simple school when you were little, but you were able to read and write, and you know the most basics of stuff and rumors and things like that. And then if you have better education than that, your intelligence should be higher. Cunning, on the other hand, is all about deduction, reasoning. It's about creating theories, hypotheses, applying the knowledge that you already know. It's about figuring things out and using knowledge for new expressions. So for example, if I'm in a chess game and I'm using intelligence, then I'm falling back upon strategies that I've heard about or that I've memorized. If I'm using cunning to play chess, then I might be creating strategies on my own in the middle of the game. But without high enough intelligence, or maybe a intelligence roll that is high enough, if you haven't come across that much chess, you might even know what the rules are if you have high cunning but very low intelligence. Yes. So, intelligence is often these questions. What do I know about this? Do I know this? Was I ever taught this? What is that? Do I know what kind of spell that is? Do I know what kind of creature that is? What do I know about this subject? And cunning is more, I want to do, I want to change, can I figure out? So intelligence and abilities and knowledge retention. Might actually rename it retention to make things less confusing. Well, it's both your knowledge and your memory. So if there was a word for that, I might have... I don't know if it is a word for that. So that I think with a lack of something better, I would have been intelligence. But changing that now would be way too much work. But point taken. Point taken. It might have been a mistake. Another good way of seeing intelligence is that somebody with high intelligence would thrive in today's school system, while somebody with low intelligence and high cunning would maybe not thrive as much. You can also see intelligence as book smarts and cunning as street smarts, or cunning as wit. Could also work. Or mental wit rather than social wit. So Twitch Mobile is a thing. Yay! Hello. So happy to have you here. Are you in the process of traveling? Are you in a car or in a train? Train. Ooh, cool. Is it a long journey? An hour or so. Okay. Heading north, I presume. We have just discussed balancing PCs, the GM discussion during with the player doing character creation, and the rule to not choose abilities for optimization's sake, but for immersion and thematic sense. And now we have just gone through the ability scores, where we have gotten. Alright. Then I think we're done with the ability scores. Let's press on ahead to the skills. So the skills written up are supposed to be what you come across the most in the game. Then in the blank spaces, you have the ability to put down any academic skill and any art and craft skill. And we come to that later on. But basically those two will should catch everything else that is not written up here. So each skill, comes with 5 different ranks that adds your proficiency bonus in different ways to the ability score that you're choosing. And what is written in the parentheses is the most common ability score that it is coupled with. So it doesn't have to be these ability scores that you roll with the skills. It can be any of the 9, but these are the most common for ease of use. So animal handling is about interacting with creatures with low intelligence. It's not about interacting with other creatures of similar intelligence, like a human to a human, unless you're like discussing maybe primal needs that a human might require. But that sounds very, very infrequent. It says animal handling, but it can be any kind of creature. It doesn't have to be strictly an animal. It can be a monstrosity. It can be a fake creature. It doesn't really matter, but for ease of use, animal handling. Cunning is more about understanding what a creature's nature is and what they might be communicating to you. What they require, what they need in the moment, what they're signaling towards you. Presence is your communication back to the animal. For example, it might be calming it down or making it submit to an order. And why it is presence and no manipulation to do this is that it is assumed that the animal doesn't know a language, that can't speak or understand a language, and therefore you're using your body language and your charisma to communicate with it. If it would be so that a GM would say that animal handling could apply to some kind of creature that does understand a language or can speak even in some way and still be considering a low intelligence creature, then manipulation might be a thing. Intelligence could also be about like recalling information about it, but cunning is supposed to be a bit more instinctual of what the animal might be needing and wanting. Then we have athletics, applied physical activity. The most simple expressions of running dexterity could be, for example, arm wrestling. For brawn. When you roll like ability checks rather than skill checks, it's the most simple things. For example, an arm wrestle or keeping your balance with dexterity, but actions that require more experience and technique and familiarity. Things that you can become better at through training, such as swimming with brawn or doing somersaults with dexterity, is the athletic skill. And brawn and athletics, of course, used when raw physical power is required, whilst dexterity is more about hand-eye coordination and balance, finger dexterity, things like that. So, for example, jumping vast distances, throwing something broad, balancing on a tightrope, that's more dexterity. Then we got deception, which is about whenever the character is trying to convince another character of something, using predominantly body language with presence, or just language with manipulation. When the character know that they are deceitful, when you don't believe in what you say, you roll deception. For example, if you want to intimidate somebody, maybe somebody standing outside of a club, like what's it called, a bouncer? A bouncer? A bouncer. It's called a bouncer. I'm sorry. You want to get in. The bouncer doesn't want you to get in. It's like big and mean and, you know, thick. You want to intimidate the bouncer to get in. That could be a deception check. If you believe that the intimidation that you're actually throwing out, that you cannot live up to what you just said, then it is deception. Later on, I can talk about it, you know, call the bouncer. I mean, it kind of fits in a way. I can talk about persuasion now, even though it's alphabetically incorrect, but since it's connected to deception. Persuasion is exactly the same as deceptions with presence manipulation. It's about persuading people of things. But instead with deception, that you don't believe that you're capable of going through with the intimidation you just said to the bouncer or the bouncer. You believe that you can with persuasion. It's when you try to persuade somebody of what you believe to be true. And it's all about the perception of the character. And it has to do with different kind of skill sets of showing integrity, being genuine, being confident in what you say with persuasion. And with deception, it's about emulating that. It's about hiding the things that your body do involuntarily because you're lying. Increased heart rate, you know, hormones are released, stress, the way that your body moves, where your eyes go. Yeah, it's about emulating persuasion. I think deception would be composure, as in keeping a poker face. That would also stop manipulating from being involved in all social skills. Well, I consider that composure is strength of character rather than an ability to change how you socially project yourself. So composure is about not being peer pressured, not compromising yourself from somebody else. So it's being unabashedly yourself. Somebody with very high composure but very low presence and manipulation are unable to maybe persuade other people of anything, but they will never give up who they are. It's a check against someone else though, not a check on yourself. That's very true. Yeah, but you can definitely do a composure check in a social situation. If there's like, as a GM, you could call for a composure check if there's a lot of stress going around and you're being like accused from every side. Maybe you're in an interrogation room and being harrowed, or you need to keep yourself calm in a ballroom where everybody's shouting, or you know, anything like that. Keeping your cool is definitely a composure check. But projecting something onto somebody else, trying to persuade somebody socially, is presence. General poker face check. I mean, I'm sure with composure, you might be able to have like a stone face, but changing the way that your body moves and your facial expressions together with what you say or what you want to project, that's not a composure skill. Or composure thing, you're just staying true to who you are with composure. Yes. Whew. I hope that made sense. But remember, what I was going to talk about later is that once you pick up a copy of Frostmark or a PDF of Frostmark and you play it with your own group and you're the GM, you're the one who sets the rules. You're the one who is using the system. You're the one who's using the setting, if you're choosing to choose the setting of Frostmark. And if you want things to be a certain way because it works better for you and for your group, then do so. I'm only trying to provide like a framework. Next up, we got empathy. Empathy, as it says, is a skill about understanding emotions, emotional expressions of others and others in general. As it say, empathy, it's the ability to understand other people. So with manipulation, it's more about changing the emotional state of another character. Deception and persuasion is about persuading and deceiving of a fact, of information, or making a point to come across, or it's more of a logical thing rather than like an emotional thing. I can see a seductress could use empathy manipulation rather than deception. In an interrogation room, trying to make somebody comfortable and then suddenly they throw out a fact that you shouldn't have because they didn't keep check on themselves, or make them agitated, so they slip up and say something they shouldn't. It can also be riling up a crowd or calming down a crowd as empathy manipulation. But when a character wants to understand and notice emotional states of others, to understand what is going on, see through persuasion, see through deception, see through empathy manipulation, is empathy composure. It's one of the more common roles in Frostmark. Oh god, my throat. Then we got investigation, about overseeing a scene or situation to form a theory from data collected. Investigation usually takes time to perform, unless an ability states otherwise, or else a perception or an academics, etc., might be required to notice clues and data first, if they're not immediately apparent on a short notice, and then maybe an investigation check to bring all of these data together into a theory. I'm still fussy of how empathy manipulation versus persuasion manipulation differs. Can you better clarify? Yeah. I will definitely try. Persuasion manipulation, using using your language to communicate, is trying to persuade another person of something. Now this might cause an emotional change in the person that you're interacting with, but that was not your goal to begin with. But if your goal is to change the emotional disposition of another person, then empathy manipulation should be used. So you have no control over if there's emotional change in the person you're persuading or deceiving. But if the goal that you have is to change the emotional state of the person you're engaging with, then it's empathy manipulation. So there can also be, empathy presence checks as well. But I didn't want to have 3 for empathy, and I can see manipulation being used more often. But empathy persuasion, maybe during a performance, could definitely work. Maybe a dancing performance or singing performance.
Hello.
So empathy is for pathos and persuasion for logic and rhetoric. Yeah, you can see that. You can definitely say that. But it's not to say that persuasion has to result in a logos response or an ethos response from the character that you're interacting with. It's not that it was not your goal to begin with. That's out of your hands. It's up to the GM or the player to think if it has an emotional response in the character. Where empathy manipulation is what you're trying to change is the emotional state, the pathos of somebody. Indeed. But I can definitely see that these two kind of wove into each other a little bit. I can definitely see how that is. So this one is one of those 2 skills that are a little bit more murky of where they end and where they start. Some of it is just to provide like more tools for the GM to encompass more situations, but it might be more complex to choose. But it's also to make interaction with people less cut and dry, where there's only one skill that you need to be good at, and one ability score is to give some variety to social interactions. So you can maybe catch people off guard, if that makes sense. So hug to feel better is empathy, and a kind word is persuasion. Yeah, I would definitely say so. But with the hug, that's just a physical expression. So I would say that would be presence empathy, rather than manipulation empathy. And I've noticed with myself, as a GM, that when I created this skill system, I loved it from day one, logically in my head, but I have GM'd and played so much with the world's most popular RPG systems, skill system and like GURP skill system and things like that, that I need to rewire my own brain. I have noticed points in the past, during past games, that I have defaulted back on other the skill knowledge that I have from past experiences, rather than the new system that I've created. So it's a learning curve for myself as well to use these new things. I definitely noticed. Leadership is about authority. Leadership is about creating authority in social interactions, and authority is a very like loaded word. But authority, I see, has no positive or negative, doesn't have any emotional value to it. Leadership can be authority as in you're inspiring trust, or that you're showing confidence in something, you're increasing morale, inspiring people. They can also be about obedience and submission and compliance, but it's about projecting and demanding authority. So that's another social skill that plays pretty interestingly with empathy, deception, and persuasion. So I would say when dealing with deception, persuasion, leadership, and empathy is that you first of all ask yourself as a GM, could this be an empathy check? Could this be a leadership check? Then if no, you think, you ask the player, are you speaking the truth? Or do you believe yourself to speak the truth? Or do you believe yourself to not speak the truth? And then you land on deception or persuasion. So I would start in that corner with thinking, can it be empathy? Can it be leadership? And once that has been turned into a no, then you move over to persuasion or deception. And this is about finding a good balance between not having too many social skills and not having too few. Would a dominatrix be all about that leadership or empathy? Now we're asking the questions, huh? I would say a mixture of the two, you know. Kiss my foot would definitely be leadership. But making the other person feel good, I guess, would be empathy. Now, it's not the dominatrix fault that kissing the dominatrix's foot makes the person feel good. So it was not the dominatrix's goal to change the emotional state of the dominated one. Why am I even talking about this? Why did you give me why did you give me this example? It's not necessarily the goal to change the emotional state of the dominated one that is kissing the foot of the dominatrix. It is just what happens inside of the head of the dominated one, but it's a leadership role because you're demanding compliance. Oh, Adrian. Why? Alright. Then we're done with leadership. Medicine. Here we get the whole with intelligence versus cunning. Intelligence is when used with diagnosing a medical problem or remembering information about something that has to do with anatomy or medicine in general. Cunning is used when you're trying to actively cure somebody or otherwise use your medical knowledge practically. So, for example, if you want to be, as a GM, if you want to apply 2 skill checks to creating a cure, if you want to be a little bit harder by introducing 2 skill checks instead of 1, you could do One skill check with intelligence to see if the person remembers the recipe and the doses necessary, and then a cunning check for all the steps in creating the cure, so everything is balanced correctly and fused correctly, and then you're also using cunning to give a dosage to the patient of the right amount in the right way. Yes, so once again, intelligence is about recalling, cunning is about practically doing something. Same thing with the cult. When you want to recall information about magic or adjacent topics to magic, you roll with intelligence, roll with cunning instant when forming a hypothesis, or practically interacting with magic. So for a technical example, we had a teleportation circle in Curse and Mother Mystery the other day. Understanding that it is a teleportation circle, or finding out what's like understanding the runes, recalling that information, that's a cult. Trying to fix what was wrong with the teleportation circle would be cunning. Then you got perception. Perception is about noticing details in a short notice. Perception with intelligence is all about having the wherewithal and the experience to quickly point out what is of interest, what is wrong in a picture, and what doesn't belong, what is of specific interest to the character. It's just falling back upon experience and what you know, what is right and wrong, and what is of interest. So it's about knowing. And when not actively perceiving and looking for something, composure is rolled perception as a form of vigilance. Yes. Persuasion, we already talked about. Subterfuge. Subterfuge is about hiding intentions and trickery. This can be sleight of hand, pickpocketing, picking a lock, forging, shadowing, etc. When a challenge requires physical precision, roll with dexterity. If it requires mental brilliance, use with cunning. So for example, forging a document would be more cunning based. Doing a sleight of hand poker card hand trick, dexterity. But the essence of subterfuge is about tricking, tricking people. Stealth. Stay quiet, move quietly. If it requires body control, you use dexterity. If it's a physical challenge, if it's a mental challenge, or then you're using cunning. So I always use this as an example, but it always works when sneaking up on somebody on a gravelly road. Then you're using dexterity to not cause a sound. And when you're trying to blend and hide into shadows, then it's usually a cunning check. You can also say that often is audio things dexterity and vision things cunning, but it doesn't have to be. But most often. It can also be, running across rooftops as a stealth check, staying out of vision. Could be it's a dexterity check, whilst cunning is maybe picking an item in a way that it doesn't cause any audio leakage, I presume. Then it would be cunning with audio. For example, and then we got survival. So stealth is for hide, dex for sneaking. Most of the time, I would say so. But it doesn't have to be. I'm always scared of giving that kind of direct advice, because then it's easy to default to it rather than like thinking about the situation. But when it's a physical challenge, then it's dexterity, and when it's a mental challenge, it's cunning. Yes, and then survival. Surviving in different environments, finding food, building a shelter, avoiding hazards, etc. This can both be wilderness, it can be in different kinds of biomes and climates. It can also be urban survival. It's basically instincts and having the knowledge of how to protect yourself in different environments from the environment. When you need to recall information, you roll with intelligence, and to use your knowledge practically or creating a theory, you roll with cunning. So for example, knowing if a berry is safe to eat, that's definitely an intelligence check. Building a shelter, so it's minimal amount of wind coming into the shelter itself, then it sounds more like cunning. Then we have the two special skills, academics and art and craft. And a character can have any amount of academic skills and any amount of art and craft skills as long as they state a different topic, a different title. For example, a character can have academics history and academics the Rianish religion, for example. As the same way as a character can have art and craft painting and art and craft singing. So these two are to catch all other skills that would not necessarily fall into those that I've already talked about. It's all bodies of knowledge is academics, and art and craft is all things that you can perform or craft, express yourself. Sometimes you can also use art and craft for professional skills. Here, what you should keep an eye on is that the player, or with the GM's help, if they want to, with the GM's supervision, you could say, decide what the title of the specific academics or art and craft skill should have. So for example, academics history, academics Rianish religion. With academics history, it's a very broad subject. It's just all history. You know some of all history that you have available to you. Whilst academics Rianish religion specifies that it's information about the religion of Rian. So you wouldn't necessarily have then a lot of information about other religions, but you would know quite a lot about specifically the Rianish religion. And here it comes to different scopes of these skills. The narrower the topic that you have, the more brilliance you have with it, but the more niche your knowledge is. And the more open-ended topic you have, the more broad the more broad is your knowledge, but the less brilliance you have in the topic itself. So for example, if you take art and craft the lyre and art and craft stringed instruments versus each other. Stringed instruments is the more broad way to name the art and craft skill. That means that you would have knowledge of most, if not all, stringed instruments, and know how to play most, if not all, stringed instruments, but not maybe that expertly all of them. Or, a majority of them. But with arts and craft lyre, that means that your character knows a lot about the lyre and are very good at playing the lyre, depending upon how many skill ranks you have, of course. But you wouldn't necessarily know that much about stringed instruments in general or know how to play them. Maybe there might be some, knowledge that overlaps to them, but it would be basic. And this is up to the player to define what their topic should be with GM supervision. What is important to note at the end of all of this, with all of these skills that we talked about, that all of these skills are restricted with what the character could possibly or reasonably know. If, for example, a character has animal handling pretty high, and they're human on Frostmark before all magic and Enna are returning, you might want to give that player negatives or disadvantage or something in that boat, or not allow them to roll at all when meeting an alien creature from another realm that they have never heard of or could possibly not have heard of. A dragon, you might have heard some fairy tales, so there might be nuggets of information there. But if we're talking about some kind of obscure creature, you probably wouldn't know anything about their nature, their habitat, how they behave. So an animal handling check, if the player would be allowed to roll such, would probably be rolled with disadvantage or even more negatives. Same thing with academics history. If you're an academics history scholar in Frostmark, the history books are heavily censored to the truth. It's not like in a library somewhere you will find a book that talks about Frostmark during the age of the Seven. Such information is censored. You might have an idea that history is wonky because you know a lot about it, because there's a holes and things like that, things that doesn't make sense with each other. But you wouldn't know any history about the other realms or the other gods because that information is not available to you. Same thing with occult. Occult can be very hard. There's very little information about magic in Frostmark. So restrict what the player could possibly roll for, or how well they can roll for something, in accordance to what they possibly and reasonably can know or perform. Yes! Yes. Any more comments about the skills? Otherwise, I am happy to move on.
Rule 1!
Yoi, I'm
Always
gonna
expect
save
them to
this
have
one.
friends. What?
I'm gonna save this one.
I'm sorry.
Alright, we don't seem to have any comments about
Damn
that.
it.
So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the next topic. Okay. Alright. So, speaking of skills, let's go through the skill discussion, because this is something that is unique, I would say, to Frostmark, or to these kind of D20 games. As I talked about earlier, is that the ability scores mentioned with the skills are just there as a placeholder for what I believe to be the most common coupling with the skills and ability scores. So empathy, composure is going to be a normal one. Stealth, dexterity is going to be a normal one. But as I said earlier, you are free to add any ability score with a skill, depending upon what the situation requires. And sometimes you might want to switch skill. You're going like, okay, roll a persuasion check. Oh no, actually, this sounds more like an empathy check. No, let's roll empathy instead. And it becomes that skill as well. So there can be some overlap and some thinking until you find the skill that you think suits the situation the most. Which brings me to the skill discussion, because this is also a collaboration with the player. So as soon as, say, a session requires a skill check to overcome some kind of challenge, the GM usually recognizes this and suggests an ability score and a skill to roll. Then, if the player accepts that and say, yeah, this sounds like sounds reasonable, they roll that skill and that ability score in accordance to the rank, or not applying any proficiency at all if they don't have proficiency with the skill that the GM pointed out. They can, however, suggest to the GM another skill check, be it either change the ability score or change the skill completely. This could be, for example, if the player has a specific academic skill that the thing could apply, or if they have an art and craft skill that can apply if the player is describing the situation in a unconventional but what's the word, creative way of solving a challenge, a skill challenge. So they can, or they can just change the skill altogether to one of the main skills if they think it applies to the situation more so than what the GM suggested. It's important though that all of these have thematic justifications when you guys speak to the GM, so they can make, as a step 3, a final verdict of what kind of skill check they want. Now this sounds very involved and sounds like it takes a lot of time, but this doesn't have to be more than a few seconds of just like GM calls out, okay, give me a persuasion manipulation, and then the player goes, but I think it's just more my body language there and how I described it, and I really want to change the emotional state of the one I'm engaging with, so maybe a process of empathy would work better here. And then the GM thinks about it and like, oh well, that's true, yeah, sure, let's make an empathy presence, for example. So don't let it take too much time, you GMs out there, but the players usually know their character sheets better and what they're good at, and you're not infallible. Sometimes you do miss something, you miss details in a scene, a scenario, and the players are there to collaboratively help you to create the best roleplay, or at least how I think it should be, the best roleplay experience. Yes. Any questions or comments about that, the skill discussion? Okay. Then I will just continue on ahead. This was a good taking vocal breaks here and there, because I do feel it's taking a toll. Okay. Then we shall continue. A checklist for converting monsters. This I think would be more useful in the written format later on when I'm done with all of this, writing it out in a good way. So I'm just gonna quickly touch upon it here, but you don't have to take notes or come back to this VOD to look at this checklist. It's going to be in a written format later on. But in playing Frostmark PDF, furthest down, you have links going to Google Docs. There's 3 links going, one to adversaries, which I call monsters instead of just monsters. I call them adversaries. This one, general document called adversaries, which includes information of how to treat the adversaries and how to balance encounters with adversaries in Frostmark. So take a look at that. It's a very important document. And then underneath that, I'm slowly working up a list of converted monsters of the world's most popular RPG system. But there's very little there from the world's most popular RPG system. I have a list of the monsters and creatures that I want to convert for Frostmark in the future. But there's something I'm not prioritizing right now because it's not necessary to play Frostmark that I have to provide for you guys. But there's some there. There's also some original creatures that I and the Shed have created together. Some pretty cool ones. I recommend checking it out. Then you also have human adversaries, which is a document full of martial humans that populate the world of Frostmark. And they're like, I think they vary between CR 1.5 to like CR 12 or something like that. A pretty good spread. And they're like marked where they come from, and written out some lore for some, but that is coming later, where I'm gonna describe what they're up to and what they're like, what they do, how they train, things like that. And then the third one is magical humanoids in Frostmark, which is a list of all humanoids that do spellcasting in Frostmark the same way, populating different areas or believing in different gods. This document will probably be used less, only probably for priests in the beginning, and then you have some example cultists basically of different gods, full spellcasters or spell swords. I think all in all you have 25 or so monsters original and about 80 martial humans and about 30 magical humans. So there's quite a list of adversaries that populate Frostmark that you can find there. If this would not be enough for you and you want to bring in some creature from the world's most popular RPG system, this is what you need to do. HP is calculated differently in Frostmark. It's calculated differently when it comes to the characters, but you find in the character creation process that you take if you roll half of the hit die or below, you add half to the result. On average, this gives you a value of 75% of the hit die. Except for level 1. Level 1 you have the full value. But this is only player characters. For NPCs, for monsters, for creatures, which I call adversaries, so it doesn't have a negative connotation to it. An adversary can be neutral, positive, or positive. For adversaries, you simply take 75% of the value of the hit die. So you roll the full, you calculate the full value of the HD. For example, if you have 16 d10, I'm just throwing something out, that's 116 total. If you just do 10 times 16, then you do that times 0.75 and you get what? 4 times 4, that's 16, so 3 times 4, 120. You get 120. And then you add the vitality modifier on top of that 120, equal to, we had 16d10, so 16 times the vitality modifier plus our 75% of the HD value. So HP is higher in Frostmark for both characters and for monsters. Then you need to change the speed. The speed in the world's most popular RPG system is expressed in feet. Change it to meters, which we will discuss a little bit later on. So hold on to your lily white butts. Then we got the ability scores. They need to be changed. Strength gets renamed Brawn. Constitution gets renamed Mortality. And then dexterity remains the same. But then you have intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. In D&D, that might work differently than it does in Frostmark. Well, the ability scores are worded a little bit differently. So in general, take these 3 stats and see what the world's most popular RPG intended with the creature, and then try to recreate that and add whatever ability score that is missing. And think about the lore of that creature and what it's meant to do. What its nature is, what its habitat is, if it's a predator, if it's a prey, etc., etc. And then apply the ability score values that you think make sense. In general, the ability scores that really matter when it comes to combat is anyway the physical stats, and then 1 stat for spellcasting, if so, or a stat that corresponds to some kind of saving throw having to be made. It's those skills that you need to keep a little bit of an extra eye on to make sure that they are not vastly different, or like that different from the world's most popular RPG. So you can so the balance of the creature mostly remains the same. Then the other ability scores are basically secondary, even tertiary, and so they don't really matter as much when it comes to balancing. It just becomes like decoration or paraphernalia. So considering what the creature is used for, what matters in a combat scenario, make sure that the balance remains the same, and then just add what you think makes sense. The saving throws also require sometimes to be renamed. Once again, if there's some saving throw of the mental or the social category, in a social and mental category, think about why that creature has the saving throw and choose the ability score that makes the most sense in Frostmark with that creature. If the creature has any dark vision or blind sight or tremor sight or something like that, that distance needs to be changed to meters once again. Challenge rating works a bit differently in Frostmark. Challenge rating is 1 step more, 1 step lower technically. If D&D would, if the world's most powerful, if the world's most popular RPG system says that a creature is CR 5 is a good for a group of what, level 3, let's say 4 people for level 3. Frostmark would have said that that a group of level 3 should face off against a CR6 instead. But Frostmark also moves the challenge rating up 2 step to remove 1 step to remove the 2 steps to remove the 1 and an eighth of a challenge rating and a 1/4 of a challenge rating. The lowest challenge rating that isn't 0 in Frostmark is 1.5, and this is to remove confusion. This is to remove confusion. But in general, all of this means that when you're converting a monster from the world's most popular RPG, just increase the CR with 1. And what it means. Then you got the abilities of the creature. If there's anything there terminology-wise, like ability scores, any skills mentions, or any distances in the Imperial system, change them to their appropriate and immersive version in Frostmark. If the monster or NPC has spellcasting, give the monster or NPC an appropriate amount of souls. You can decide this yourself, or you can just go to the starting soul value table and look at the CR level of the creature and compare that to the level. And in Frostmark, CR and level should be the same. CR1 should be equal to a level 1 character in general. If it says innate spellcasting for the world's most popular RPG system, then change that simply to Soul Mastery spellcasting. And then you don't need to add any souls. And then you have attacks, where you need to change the distance, the range of melee weapons or abilities from the Imperial system to the metric system. And then there might be some abilities and stuff like that that have been slightly changed balance-wise in Frostmark, so that will have to be done by a case-by-case basis. And then the format of how a monster is presented is different in Frostmark as well. This is up to you if you want to use, of course, but I definitely recommend the way that Frostmark presents monsters, because it has the most vital information on the top and the least vital in the bottom. Are legendary actions and legendary resistance a thing in Frostmark, or are they property of other systems? Also lair actions. They are general enough that they are not patented. If the world's most powerful, popular RPG system, if they would be able to patent any of their mechanics, I think they would have done so already. And when it comes to, you know, copyright, you cannot copyright a mechanic or an expression of a mechanic, or stats or things like that. Rules, you cannot copyright rules. So unless it's patented, legendary actions, legendary resistances, and lair actions is a mechanical thing, and therefore it's okay. It's okay to use them. What is interesting though is with there are some fluff text that can be provided in like lair actions or like lair phenomenon and stuff like that. That's a little bit dicey if it's like in a creative expression instead, and therefore copyrightable. But the lair action itself or the legendary action itself, like as in one action to detect something, it's definitely not copyrightable. Yeah. We can take a look. And the format of how Frostmark do these monsters and adversaries you can both find in glorious like PDF format in the teaser, or a more actionable one in Google Docs in the links that I talked about earlier, that is in the bottom of the Playing Frostmark PDF. Yes. Any other questions about converting monsters? No worries. It's a really good thing to ask and think about. Alright, no other comments about that? Questions about converting monsters? When you get the hang of it, converting monsters, and it's not like a terribly complicated monster, it might just take you like 5 minutes, this whole process. Just need to change the HP, just change the wording of speed, senses, abilities, spellcasting, attacks, add the souls if it has spellcasting, just do +1 on the challenge rating, and then you might have to do some thinky things with the ability scores and the appropriate saving throws, but it's pretty easy when you have a simple monster. Alright, okay. Then let's continue on to the next topic, which is incidentally using the metric system. Why? It's a very good question. It certainly has to do with bias. I feel more secure, comfortable, I should say, using the metric system. It also has to do with the superiority complex of like proving that the metric system is better. But it's also about that it requires less thinking when you have to deal with values and numbers, as the metric system is just a 10-based system where everything is just logical and makes sense. If you ever need to change the imperial system to metric, there's 2 different kinds of conversions. The first conversion is tactical units, as in when distance, and maybe, I don't know, it usually has to do with distance. When distance on a battle map matters. When the exact number of squares on the battle map matters. This can be range for abilities, spells, weapons, for example. Then 5 feet equals 1 meter. So 30 feet, 5 divided by 30 becomes 6. So 6 meters is 30 feet. And then we have the second category, when mostly, converting weight, volume, long distances where the exact number of squares on a battle map doesn't matter anymore, or is of no consequence exactly how many squares it is. Use an online converter and round it up or down to whatever seems sensible, depending upon what the value is used for and its size. So for example, if you have a spell that can be heard up to X meters away, then we probably don't need to be that super duper precise. If it's a weight to something that we have in our inventory, then we might want to be a bit more precise, but not make it uncomfortable in like value-wise. So just compare it to the other values and just round up or down to a point where it feels sensible and like the rest. If the metric system is hard to wrap your mind around, if you do come from an imperial system background, consider meters on the battle map equal squares instead. So whenever you see the M, you think square instead. So a spell with a range of 6 meters becomes a spell that has a range of 6 squares instead. So if that makes things easier, just think in the terms of squares rather than meters. Yes, yes, yes. There we go. Any comment about that? I think that's pretty cut and dry. Alright, then we shall continue. I don't think I've seen Hecto and Deca in use since elementary school. Deca, I have basically never seen. Ever, I should say, since you're school. But Hecto is is sometimes used with food, I think. Like I mean, like measuring the weight of like fruit and stuff like that, or in deli fresh stores, like in supermarkets. I've seen some hectograms. But Deca, no, never Deca. I think it has to do with like that kilograms become a little bit too many numbers. It's easier to think in hecto than kilo if most of it is like hecto based. Yeah. Then let's talk about leveling. Woo! I don't get older, I level up. So, Frostmark uses only milestone leveling. And this is something, I can't control everybody, but this is something that I as a creator and the system itself feel very strongly about, because it helps to inform that combat is not the only way to create stakes and tension and consequences. It's not the only thing to create risks. It's not the only thing that is important and what your characters grow from. It is to have a more of a balanced look of any kind of encounter you can have. It doesn't always have to be combat oriented, and Frostmark tries to tailor itself to cater to players who are slightly more narrative and roleplay and setting interested rather than metagaming. So this is a step to move away from metagaming into the more narrative way of looking at things. This way you do not tempt your players with combat, thinking that they're missing out on experience if they take the peaceful or the talking route rather than the shop stab route. So with milestone leveling, you as a GM, you decide when the player levels. And as I said, since physical, mental, and social encounters have the same weight in Frostmark, all three can lead to or contribute to a level up. When preparing your campaign or an adventure, consider which points in the story would be suitable for a level up. So you already have like prepped of where you think it would be suitable to get it, either when like the players achieve something, reach a certain point, discover something, make it through something. But you create this milestones or hallmarks or points in your story where you feel like a level up is appropriate. It might also be that you throw in a level because the players are up to, you know, creating their own stakes and consequences and being creative, and there's like a tense situation and they have been waiting for a level up for some time. You can also throw in a level up at that point if it feels like you want to reward your players and it's about time. Examples of suitable level ups could be defeating a dangerous enemy in it doesn't have to be through combat, but it can also be through other means. It can be completing a great task, securing an advantage, discovering a clue that pushes the story forward, doing an excessive amount of training for like a really long time. Maybe you have like downtime for a year, and when you come back to the table, you have leveled up once, so forth and so on. But it should be at appropriate times in the story, and for each new level up there should be a bit more required for each level up. Yeah, any thoughts about that? Oh, sorry. Or is it crystal clear? Alright, then we shall carry on to the next topic, which is choosing power level of your campaign. You have 3 power levels of a campaign in Frostmark. You have Mundane, Heroic, and Champion. These decide how many points the player has to spend on their character's ability scores and how many accomplishment points they receive. This informs like how all well-rounded the characters are, considering that they don't have to take like weak stats to gain high ones. It can also show that they can afford really high ones. And when it comes to accomplishments, they can walk around with better equipment from the beginning, have more skill points, more saving throws, more proficiency with arms and armor. Basically, it makes the characters more talented and start off with more resources to start with. This difference in power is not that great, but it's still significant. The power levels are supposed to mirror and accompany your intended scope of the campaign that you want to hold. So it makes the characters more talented, and they have more resources to start off with, meaning they're often off to a better start. But they still basically level, at the same pace. I mean, it depends upon GM to GM, but if you would have taken like a control group of the same GM and the same adventure, have the same points where they level up. Like when it comes to abilities and feats and stuff like that, everything is the same. The characters in higher power level campaigns are just more talented with the powers and abilities that they have, and they start off a bit stronger. This is very much in general and how I see it. Of course, the GM is free to decide exactly if they want a mundane, heroic, or champion campaign with whatever campaign that they're planning. But these are like some general guidelines of how to think about it. I see a mundane campaign to be more of a localized campaign, or a campaign maybe in a specific region. There are few instances of traveling, or short distances of traveling. We might go from a scope of starting a little village to maybe dealing with kingdom related stuff in the end, at most. Traveling to other realms, it should be very uncommon and hard. This also generally means that we get smaller stakes and lesser consequences. Now, that is not to say that these stakes and these consequences are lesser for the character, lesser for the NPCs that live in this area, lesser for the area itself or the kingdom that the areas within. But when you look at the scope of things, when you compare it to the scope of how Frostmark itself is faring, or the scope of how the universe itself is faring, all in all, then it is smaller stakes and lesser consequences. If you take that perception. Then we got heroic. It's more of a regional campaign, or more of a kingdom campaign. That can turn into a campaign of Frostmark itself. You have some instances of travel, which are usually medium length, and then maybe some traveling to other realms, and therefore we also have medium stakes and medium consequences that is either kingdom based or maybe part of Frostmark or Frostmark based. In between mundane and champion. And then speaking of champion, is often more of a realm jumping extravaganza, where all of Frostmark is the home of the characters. We usually go from kingdom to Frostmark to all the other realms based. We have high stakes at every turn that threaten whole realms or several realms, and severe and extensive consequences. There's a lot hanging on the thread. A lot that the characters can help to alleviate, or if they would fail, something terrible might happen to all of Frostmark or to the whole universe. Any questions or comments about that? This will matter more on the lower levels, I think. Definitely. Yeah, when you look at the actual power difference between the characters, definitely lower levels, it matters more. And not to say that a mundane campaign can turn into a realm jumping extravaganza, but this is more like guidelines of like what kind of campaign you want to tell. A guideline of like the power level of the campaign itself. But yes, as you say, it matters the most on the lower levels. Okay, I think we're moving on. Unless Hemside, you got something else for me. Yeah. Okay. And then we have choosing your own playstyle. Like I said before, I'm gonna continue saying it. Even if I sit here and talk about a lot of things in absolute terms, and the Playing Frostmark PDF presents the rules as they are, it doesn't mean that you have to use them all or be happy with those presented. Customize to your heart's content. So it suits your playstyle and the characters you have around the table. But remember that if something that you're changing, adding, or removing for the players, it's very, very important that they know of this as early as possible in the starting off up a game process as possible. This has to do with expectations and knowing what you're signing up for. So make these decisions with the players or before the session 0, so you can introduce that during the session 0 or the character creation process, or decide this with the players during those times. So all of you know what to expect come, in the future. And then of course there might be situations where you want to change a rule later on in play, but then I would recommend like doing that with the players as a discussion, so everybody is on the same page and happy with it. Some examples of choosing your own playstyle when it comes to removing complexity is, for example, to remove encumbrance. If you don't want to bookkeep encumbrance values, of just keeping it homebrewy, of like just mentioning like, wait, now I think your character's carrying a little bit too much, it's breaking my immersion, I'm gonna give you a penalty, the GM says. Ammo, you do not need to track the ammo if you want of your characters. You might want to try to find a way to balance this as another way if you want to, but if you don't want your characters to buy bundles of 20 arrows and then count that down if they're ranged characters, then you can hand wave that in any way that you please. Then we also have living costs. Also something that is in normal Frostmark. You need to pay rent, you need to pay food, and whatever else is connected to your home and the place and the living style that your character wants. If you do not want to track this economy, you can also hand wave that. And then lastly, of reducing complexity is injuries. If you do not want combat to grant potentially lasting afflictions and be that I would say as dangerous as it is right now, then you can also forego the injury system completely. Ideas of increasing complexity is making the injuries more vast or difficult, making environmental requirements, like you need to have instead of just saying super Arctic environment or like super hot environment, there might be environments in between that require certain equipment or certain loadouts so the characters can exist comfortably in that weather. More diseases, more poisons, maybe wounds can get infected, maybe magic, healing magic is works differently. And it might be stress in combat and pain and so on and so forth. So change, add, remove to the point that you and your group have fun. All right. Any comments or questions about that? Alright. Then I'm going to move over to, I think, gonna be the last topic for tonight, which is the possibility of not using the Frostmark world at all. When you have come to this point in the PDF, like in this section, in this GM preliminary thing in the PDF or in this VOD, you can stop and you can be happy. You can play Frostmark, its system, with your own world quite easily. That is if you keep how souls and magic interact with each other, or a semblance of it, as in how magic, as in souls is the basis for magic, soul marks, and having souls in your soul mark, and casting with souls, and ritual casting, and the soul check, and all of that. If you keep that package, the soul package, you could call it, then you can just take Frostmark's system as it is. You might need to change the lore of some backgrounds, some races. You might need to change some mechanics of some races and backgrounds, of course, depending upon the world that you have. But it would be relatively easy to do so. It's up to your own effort and attention that you want to bring to the own world that you're creating, and the changes you wanted to do to the material that is already presented, that has connotations to the lore and setting of Frostmark. If you do not want the soul package, there might be some more changes that you have to do. Changes mechanically to spellcasting. You might want to remove the soul check, want to remove the soul mark. If you do, keep in mind that you're removing a negative to spellcasting that was used to balance the fact that spellcasting in Frostmark is more powerful than it is in the world's most popular role-playing game, because you receive more magic in Frostmark, as in more spells, and you receive spell slots that regenerate or replenish on a short rest up to level 4, and the rest on a long rest, and there's no prepared spells. So the soul package as a mana, you could say, is a negative to balance off this extra power boost that spellcasting has received, or you should say that the boost is a reaction to the soul package instead. So you might want to remove some of these advantages, make it so that maybe all spellcasting gets back on a long rest instead. There might be prepared spells. You might also want to lower the amount of potential, maybe 5 for minor and 10 for moderate and major. You might also want to create your own spell table so the players cannot choose how many spell slots and how many spells known they have. And you also want to create spells lists for the ability origin so they can just choose whatever they want. To limit and restrict magic if we remove the negative that is the soul package. But that's kind of it. It's pretty easy. If you keep the soul package or just lower these advantages that spellcasting has, you could play Frostmark's rules and have the character creation process of Frostmark in a the world's most popular RPG friendly setting, like one of those homebrew fantasy worlds that works for anything, or you can have play in Faerun, Forgotten Realms, Mystara, Eberron, and the realms of dread, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Any comments or questions about that? The only time I hear of anyone having issues with spreading the world the system tends to be in RPG horror stories. Oh. Oh really? Damn. Well, I can see it can be hard to separate setting and system if there's a lot of customized mechanics that is directly tied to the system. And, I would say that has to do with a, case-by-case basis depending upon the system itself. And here what I'm basically saying that if you like the rest of what Frostmark do, but you want to play it in a for example Faerun or Forgotten Realms, then it's only the soul package that I'm using that is directly tied to the lore of Frostmark that you actually have to spend some time with changing to make it compatible with that standard fantasy world kind of setting. So I think that it depends upon the system. If you have a system that doesn't have any of these rules that are directly connected to unique features in the lore, in the setting, then it would definitely belong in the RPG horror stories. But if you wanted to fit inside of, for example, Forgotten Realms, you need to do some changes to the spellcasting system in Frostmark. Otherwise, you used to have to accept the soul package. I mean, that's just lore behind the system. True, but when your decisions when creating the mechanics is based upon the lore, then those mechanics might not be universal, if that makes sense. I mean, if you want to play like a very standard fantasy adventure, then you can't just take Frostmark as it is, because the soul package is not standard fantasy. Alright. Considering the time, as I thought, it took a really long time going through it and answering questions. And I'm pretty happy that I actually got to this part, because this is basically finished all the mechanical parts that I wanted to bring up. And then next up is setting and narrative stuff, and just lore related stuff that has to do with if you want to play something Frostmark or Frostmark-esque, if you want to use the setting and the lore of Frostmark and not just the system. So this is a good point to end this first part of the GM section. And I didn't have the time to write out all of the points that I wanted to make in the setting and narrative part anyway, so I find it very serendipitous that I might have the time to do so, to make this next part as good as the first. But before I end, because I'm also noticing that my voice is giving out after talking so much. Any general questions about what we're talking about, or any other questions that related to the mechanics of Frostmark? Let's go back all the way here. Let's make it like an open forum for whatever you guys want to talk about, and then we're gonna wrap it up. If there is any questions, I might have been very... I hope I've been very... what is the word? Thorough. I'm gonna wait a little bit longer and see if I think the split to mechanics and settings, but I'm just getting at above. Oh yeah, true. But I set out creating both this GM section and the setting, like the world, like the whole RPG system of Frostmark, with that a little bit in mind, knowing that there are many GMs out there who wants to make their own worlds, or might not want to. Like, you have two ends of this of the slider, I guess. You have the overachiever GMs who always want to create their own homebrew worlds and using modules and using anybody else's work as, you know, sheep. They always want to bring something new and exciting to their players, and they love that creative outburst of just creating a new world. Then you have the other end of this the spectrum, who's like who only like create what they need to and don't want to read like what 80 pages of lore to understand a setting, and just want to create some characters and be in some village called Greendale and, you know, kill some dragons and save some damsels, you know? They might also not want to care about the setting and just take the system and just play in this very blank world that expands as the adventure goes on. At both of these, there's nothing negative or positive with either of these, like more, I wouldn't say extremes, but they're definitely towards the ends of the slider, the spectrum. But I recognize that I wanted Frostmark to be as usable and enjoyable as I could. And even though I wanted to create a strong interaction between the setting and the system, that they seem to fit together, and I wanted the spell package to both be entrenched in the system and the setting, it was also my thought that I wanted Frostmark to be enjoyed in different ways. Once I give out my product Frostmark, I have no control of how somebody uses it. So I wanted to make it as usable for you as possible. So I also had that thought in the back of my head that I wanted Frostmark to be able to be enjoyed without the setting. But there's some awesome role-playing games out there that don't do the interaction between setting and system. They kind of exist on their own. And those who have, they're steeped, like they're so entrenched, it's really hard to separate the setting and the system. And they can be enjoyable, both of those things as well. It's just a different way of interacting with them and a different way of using them. It's a different kind of tool, if that makes sense. It's like comparing a movie and a book. It can still be great movies and great books, but you're using them and enjoying them differently. But yes, it was a goal of mine, definitely. I ended up probably somewhere in between these two. Okay. Alright.
Don't just look over here and judge me quietly.
Well, I can't say anything about it, can I? Any last comments? I'm just patiently waiting. I've been feeling like I'm monopolizing the shadow leaning. I hope I didn't manage to talk over anybody or something. No, I don't think so at all, Homicide. I don't think there were so many active, you know what I mean, if you say like this, I am grateful that you're here and actively engaging with the material that I have, because then I feel more, how to say, confident in what I'm speaking about. Then I know that somebody finds it to be coherent, to be coherent and useful in some way. I think there's just not that many here that are interested in GMing Frostmark in the chat tonight, so I think you were basically the only one. I think Adrian would have made more comments, but he's on a train. He probably already finished his little journey and hopped up somewhere. So I think you're just the only one here who was interested in chatting, so I'm just happy that you were here and I was able to catch you. That's why I made that question in the chat if somebody wanted to be here live, so I could sync up with that person or people. So thank you. Thank you for being here, making all these comments, talking to me. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be of service. And I hope I also been of service to make Frostmark potentially interesting for you to GM is what I hope. At least now I hope the mechanics is a little bit easier for you to use. Alright though. Yes. Then I think I started to consider it. Thanks for the presentation. Presentation, yeah. It's getting a bit later, so I'll probably sign off now. Yes. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Then we shall I shall definitely do the same. Considering I cannot continue. I think that we might do a part 2 for the setting, maybe on Wednesday. Sounds like a good idea. Tomorrow, Sunday, and Monday I have session-related things. But Wednesday evening will probably be the next time I can do this. Otherwise, next Friday. So I'll probably make a little mention in the chat asking if Wednesday evening or Friday evening, if people are available for that. Otherwise, thank you everybody who's been lurking or who's watching this later. I hope that this has been useful for you. Remember that this will at some point in the future be in written text, also available in the PDF. Playing Frostmark there at the end, but remember that everything is subject to change, as we're still in an alpha version of Frostmark until the official release of the Kickstarter. Otherwise, if you have some questions about what I talked about tonight, you can always ask me in the Frostmark channel, in the Charismatic Lounge, or All Things Frosty. But yeah, I hope this has been useful, and thank you all. I think